Why living close to your children in old age could be the biggest mistake of your life. As we age, one of life's most profound questions often comes to the forefront. Where should we live out our twilight years? Many believe that the best course of action is to live close to their children, assuming that proximity to family will bring love, care, and happiness. But what if this decision, often made with the best of intentions, ends up being the very source of your greatest pain? Could the act of moving closer to your children, in the hopes of finding companionship, instead leave you feeling lonelier than ever before? This is not just a question of geography. It's a journey into the deeper truths of attachment, expectations, and inner peace. Consider this. What if clinging to family ties in our later years blinds us to the peace and fulfillment we could find within ourselves? By exploring the teachings of Zen Buddhism and reflecting on the story of one elderly man, we might uncover a surprising truth about the path to genuine contentment. In the words of the Buddha, attachment is the root of suffering. Could it be that in old age, our attachment to family becomes the very cause of our pain? Let us delve into this through a Zen-inspired story of an elderly man and his journey of self-discovery, the desire for closeness. An elderly man, having spent decades working tirelessly to provide for his family, eventually found himself alone in a large, empty house. The walls, once alive with the vibrant echoes of children's laughter and the hum of daily life, now seemed to amplify the profound silence that had settled over his days. His children, whom he had nurtured with love and devotion, had moved away to build their own lives, leaving behind a void that felt impossible to fill. Loneliness, like an uninvited guest, began to linger in every corner of the house, making even the smallest of routines feel heavy. As the quiet nights stretched into months, he thought to himself, "Perhaps if I live near my children, I will feel their love and warmth again. Isn't it their duty to care for me now?" These thoughts brought a fleeting sense of hope, and with this belief, he began preparing to move closer to one of his children. He packed his belongings with care, folding not just clothes but also the fragile hopes of a more connected future. Initially, the decision seemed to be everything he had dreamed of. His grandchildren's laughter greeted him warmly, their small hands tugging at his as they ran to play. His children welcomed him with promises of frequent visits and shared meals. For a brief moment, the emptiness that had once consumed him seemed to dissipate, replaced by the comforting illusion of belonging. Yet, beneath this newfound joy lay the subtle seeds of future discontent. He would soon come to understand a hard truth. Physical closeness, while comforting, could not guarantee the emotional connection his soul so deeply craved. And the comforting, the illusion of happiness. For the first few months, life seemed idyllic. Weekends were filled with lively family gatherings, the warm embrace of his grandchildren, and the comforting sounds of their laughter echoing through the house. He felt a sense of joy and purpose, as if all the sacrifices he had made over the years were finally being repaid in the form of these tender moments. It was as if the void in his heart was slowly being filled, one cherished interaction at a time. But as time wore on, subtle and disheartening changes began to take shape. The vibrant weekends grew quieter, and the visits from his children became sporadic. Phone calls that once brought him solace were now cut short with hurried excuses like, "I'm busy," or "I'll come by later." The sparkle of hope he had once felt started to dim, replaced by a creeping sense of unease. The elderly man began to feel invisible, as though he was becoming an afterthought in his children's busy lives. Despite living so close, the emotional distance between them seemed to stretch further with each passing day. His once vibrant home, a sanctuary he had envisioned as full of love and connection, now felt eerily empty. But this emptiness carried a deeper ache than before. It was not just silence, but a silence tinged with unmet expectations and a growing sense of isolation. He sat alone in his quiet house, his thoughts often drifting back to the decision that had once filled him with so much hope. The dream of rekindling familial bonds now seemed like a fragile illusion, leaving him to wonder, had moving closer to his children truly been the right choice? Or had it only deepened the loneliness he so desperately sought to escape? The weight of expectations. As his loneliness deepened, resentment grew like a heavy stone pressing on his chest. I gave them everything, he would think in the quiet of his nights. I raised them, educated them, and prepared them for life. I sacrificed my dreams and comfort to ensure theirs. Now, in my old age, don't I deserve their attention and care? These thoughts, though born from a lifetime of love, began to transform into bitter accusations, building an invisible wall between him and the very people he cherished most. His expectations became a relentless weight, gnawing at the edges of his heart. Each missed call, every postponed visit felt like a personal affront, deepening the wound of perceived neglect. He would replay the sacrifices of his past like an old film, each memory fueling his sense of injustice. Yet, amidst the growing darkness of his emotions, a restlessness began to stir, as if his soul knew that something deeper was at play. One restless night, he dreamed of a serene Zen master, seated beneath a blooming cherry tree. The master's voice was calm but piercing. "You are clinging to the idea that your children must fulfill your desires. The more you expect, the more you will suffer. True peace does not come from others, but from within." These words echoed in his mind like ripples spreading across still water. Awakening from the dream, he felt both shaken and enlightened. The master's words lingered in his thoughts as he began to examine the truth of his suffering. Were his expectations fair? Was it truly his children's responsibility to provide him with happiness? Slowly, with the clarity that only introspection can bring, he began to see that the root of his pain was not their actions, but his own attachment to them. It was not neglect, but his relentless yearning that was the source of his unhappiness. His suffering, he realized, was a storm brewing within his own heart. The realization of attachment through meditation, the elderly man began to confront the depths of his own heart. As he sat in silence, he realized that his suffering was not born from his children's actions or inactions, but rather from his own attachment to them. He had built his happiness on the fragile foundation of their presence and attention, believing that they owed him care and affection in return for the life he had given them. This expectation, he now saw, was like a chain binding both him and his children, a source of tension that weighed on them all. This realization struck him deeply, like a ray of light cutting through the fog of his emotions. He recalled the Buddha's teaching, "Nothing is yours. You cannot hold on to anything. Everything you have is borrowed." These words resonated with a clarity he had never felt before. His children, whom he had nurtured with unconditional love, were not possessions but individuals with their own lives, families, and paths to follow. They were not his to control or to hold on to, no matter how much love he had poured into them. As he reflected on this truth, a profound sense of humility washed over him. He began to see how his clinging to the past, to the roles they once played as dependent children, and he as their protector, had created a web of dependency and expectation. Each thread of this web was spun from his desire to be needed, his fear of being forgotten, and his inability to let go of the roles that had once defined him. For days, he continued to meditate on these realizations, allowing the weight of his attachment to unravel. He understood that by demanding fulfillment from his children, he had inadvertently placed them in an impossible position. They could not fill the void within him because that void was his own creation, born of misplaced expectations. With each breath, he worked to release these burdens, embracing a new understanding. True love is not about clinging, but about allowing those you care for to walk their own paths freely, without the shadow of your expectations. This profound shift in perspective began to free him. He felt the tight grip of his attachment loosening, replaced by a sense of openness and peace. He began to see his children not as extensions of his own happiness, but as independent beings with lives to lead. This realization did not diminish his love for them, but rather transformed it into something purer, a love without conditions or demands, rooted in acceptance and understanding. The dangers of dependence. In his search for closeness, the elderly man had unknowingly become dependent on his children for emotional support. He waited for their calls, relied on their visits, and sought their presence to fill the void within him. But when these did not happen as he wished, he felt abandoned and betrayed. He recalled a story told by a Buddhist monk. A man carried a heavy sack of grain on his back, complaining bitterly about the burden. When offered help, he refused, saying, "If I do not carry this burden myself, I will never build the strength to walk on my own." The elderly man realized that his emotional burden was his own to carry. By placing it on his children, he had weakened his own ability to find peace within himself. He recognized that dependence not only limited his personal growth, but also placed undue strain on his family. The path to inner peace. Sitting beneath a tree one quiet afternoon, the man meditated deeply, letting the sounds of nature wash over him. The gentle rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of birds, and the soft caress of the breeze all seemed to whisper truths he had long ignored. In that tranquil moment, he saw clearly that his suffering had not come from living near his children or even from their perceived neglect. The real source of his pain was the weight of his own attachment, the belief that his happiness depended on them. He recalled the Buddhist teaching, "Peace comes from within, do not seek it without." These words resonated more deeply now than they ever had before. He realized that he had spent so much of his life seeking validation, comfort, and love from external sources, his children, his family, even the roles he had played as a provider and protector. Yet, these things were transient and, by their nature, could never offer the lasting peace he craved. With this newfound clarity, he shifted his focus inward. Instead of measuring his happiness by his children's attention, he began to practice gratitude for the moments they did share. A fleeting phone call, a grandchild's laughter, or even a simple smile became treasures to him, not because they filled a void, but because they reminded him of life's fleeting beauty. He embraced the simple joys of daily existence, the warmth of the sun on his skin, the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil, and the stillness of meditation that connected him to something far greater than himself. These moments, he discovered, were not just distractions from loneliness, but profound sources of contentment. Each breath during meditation became a reminder of the present, a present unburdened by past regrets or future desires. The man found that by anchoring his happiness in the here and now, he could cultivate a sense of peace that no external circumstance could disrupt. The path to inner peace, he understood, was not a grand journey, but a gentle return to oneself, to the simple truth that joy and serenity were always within reach. The freedom of letting go. As the elderly man let go of his expectations, he felt an overwhelming and liberating sense of freedom, as though a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he no longer sought his children's actions or attention as a measure of his own worth. He realized that his happiness was never theirs to give. It had always been his responsibility to cultivate from within. This newfound perspective transformed the way he approached his life. Instead of clinging to the hope of validation from his children, he embraced the richness of his own journey. He started to rediscover the passions he had set aside for so long. Tending to his small garden with the care of an artist, finding joy in the simple act of sipping tea while watching the sunrise, and immersing himself in the quiet solace of meditation. As he allowed his children to live their lives without the weight of his unspoken demands, he found peace in giving them the freedom he had always hoped for himself. This shift in focus did not weaken his love for them, it strengthened it. By letting go of his need for control, he was able to love them more purely, without the shadow of expectation clouding their relationship. In turn, this created a space for his children to reconnect with him in ways that felt genuine and heartfelt. The elderly man's sense of dignity returned. He no longer viewed his twilight years as a time of waiting for others, but as a chapter filled with opportunity. Opportunity to grow, to reflect, and to live fully on his own terms. In the quiet of his days, he discovered a profound truth. Freedom comes not from others fulfilling our desires, but from releasing those desires altogether. And in that release, he found a life brimming with peace and fulfillment. Surprisingly, this profound shift in perspective brought about a quiet but significant transformation in his relationship with his children. Without the suffocating weight of unspoken expectations, their interactions took on a new authenticity, a warmth untainted by obligation or guilt. When they visited, it was not because they felt they had to, but because they truly wanted to. The elderly man's newfound independence, his ability to find peace and fulfillment within himself, sparked a deep sense of respect and admiration in his family. His children, who once felt the subtle pressure of his unfulfilled expectations, now approached him with genuine affection and curiosity. They noticed his serenity, his quiet contentment, and found themselves drawn to the calm presence he now exuded. Each visit became an exchange of love and joy, unburdened by any sense of duty. It was as if the space created by his letting go had allowed their love to flow back more freely and sincerely. This unspoken shift deepened their bond, creating a harmony he had longed for, but had never known was possible. The Lesson of Impermanence. The elderly man's journey brought him to one of Buddhism's most profound teachings, impermanence. In his moments of reflection, he began to understand how deeply this truth was woven into every aspect of existence. Everything in life, youth, health, relationships, even the roles we hold so dear, is transient. Time, like a flowing river, changes all things. To resist this natural flow, to cling desperately to what once was, is to invite suffering. At first, this realization was painful. He recalled the days when his children were small, their hands reaching for his guidance, their lives intertwined with his own. He had held those memories tightly, wishing for the simplicity and closeness they represented. But as he sat with his thoughts, he began to see that the past, no matter how cherished, was gone. To live in those memories was to ignore the beauty and opportunities of the present. He accepted, with both sadness and peace, that his role as a parent had evolved. His children were no longer the small, dependent beings who needed his constant care and attention. They had grown into independent adults with their own lives, their own challenges, and their own families to nurture. And he, too, was not the same man who had once carried them on his shoulders or stayed awake through sleepless nights to soothe their cries. By embracing the truth of impermanence, he began to let go of his longing for what could never return. With this acceptance came a sense of liberation. He found peace in knowing that change was not something to fear, but a natural part of life's unfolding. Just as the seasons shift, bringing both loss and renewal, so too did his relationships with his children evolve. The love he shared with them remained, but it had transformed into something more subtle, more resilient, a bond that did not depend on proximity or constant validation. This understanding allowed him to approach his days with a lighter heart. Instead of clinging to the past or resisting the future, he embraced the present for what it was, a fleeting but precious moment in the ever-changing tapestry of life. Impermanence, he realized, was not a loss but a gift, a reminder to cherish what we have while we have it and to release it when it is time to move forward. Finding joy in solitude. With his new understanding, the elderly man discovered a profound joy in solitude. What once felt like a burden, the weight of being alone, now revealed itself as an opportunity for self-reflection and spiritual growth. Solitude became not an absence, but a presence, a space where he could reconnect with the essence of who he was, beyond the roles he had played as father, provider, and protector. Each day began with quiet meditation. Sitting beneath the shade of a tree, or by the window where sunlight streamed in, he let his thoughts settle like leaves on a still pond. In this stillness, he found a connection to something greater than himself, a profound sense of unity with the world around him. The solitude he once feared became a sacred refuge, a source of clarity and peace. He took to tending his small garden with a newfound reverence. Each seed planted, each leaf tended to, became a meditation in itself. The simple act of nurturing life, of watching flowers bloom and vegetables grow, mirrored his own inner transformation. He realized that, much like the garden, his heart had needed time, care, and patience to bloom into something beautiful. The elderly man also rediscovered the beauty of small pleasures. Sipping tea in the morning became a ritual, the warmth of the cup grounding him in the present. Listening to the rustling of leaves or the distant song of birds filled him with a sense of wonder he had long forgotten. These small moments, he realized, were not distractions from loneliness, but profound reminders of the richness of life itself. As he immersed himself in these practices, he felt a growing sense of completeness. His happiness no longer depended on external circumstances, on visits from his children or affirmations from others. Instead, it arose naturally from within, a quiet wellspring of contentment that nothing could disrupt. Solitude, he discovered, was not about being isolated, but about being fully present with himself, free from the need for validation or distraction. This newfound joy in solitude brought with it a deep sense of gratitude. He began to see life not as something he had to endure, but as a gift to be cherished. Each moment became precious, not for what it promised, but for what it was. In this way, he found a kind of freedom he had never known before. The freedom to simply be, to exist in harmony with himself and the world around him. The wisdom of non-attachment. Through his journey, the elderly man fully embraced the profound wisdom of non-attachment, a concept that had eluded him for much of his life. He came to see that clinging to people, possessions, or specific outcomes was like grasping at sand. The tighter he held on, the more it slipped through his fingers. This realization, though simple in theory, required immense courage to accept and embody. He began to understand that suffering was not caused by external circumstances, but by his own resistance to the natural flow of life. Every missed call, every unfulfilled expectation from his children had not been the source of his pain. It was his attachment to how he thought things should be that had created the storm within him. By clinging to the idea that his children owed him their time and attention, he had unknowingly chained himself to the very suffering he wished to escape. But letting go did not mean he stopped caring. Non-attachment, he learned, was not a cold indifference or a withdrawal from the world. Rather, it was an embrace of life's ever-changing nature, a deep acceptance of impermanence, and the understanding that love, in its purest form, is without conditions. By letting go of his demands on others, he found that his love for his children deepened. He could cherish them as they were, without the weight of expectation clouding his feelings. As he practiced non-attachment, he felt a lightness in his heart that he had not experienced in years. The emotional turmoil that had once plagued him began to dissipate like morning mist under the warmth of the sun. Each day became a gift, not because it fulfilled his desires, but because it simply was. He saw beauty in the transient moments, a fleeting bird song, the gentle rustle of leaves, or a quiet afternoon spent in solitude. These were no longer just passing details. They were reminders of the richness of life when lived without grasping. In embracing non-attachment, the elderly man discovered a freedom that transcended his circumstances. It was a freedom not from relationships or responsibilities, but from the relentless need to control them. This inner liberation became his greatest treasure, allowing him to live the remainder of his days with peace, clarity, and an open heart. The legacy of peace. In his final years, the elderly man experienced a profound transformation in his relationships with his children. Freed from the heavy weight of expectations, their love began to flow naturally and effortlessly. When they visited, it was with genuine warmth and affection, a shared joy untarnished by obligation or guilt. On the days they could not visit, he no longer felt the sting of disappointment or abandonment. Instead, he smiled with gratitude, content in the knowledge that their love was steadfast, even if expressed from afar. This change was not simply the result of their actions, but of his own inner peace. By letting go of his need to control the relationship or measure it by external standards, he allowed his happiness to root itself in the present moment, unshaken by circumstances beyond his control. He found solace not in their physical presence, but in the unspoken bond that tied them together, one that transcended proximity or time. As he neared the end of his life, he often sat quietly, reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He thought about the lessons etched into his heart, the dangers of clinging to attachments, the liberation that comes with self-reliance, and the profound serenity that arises from embracing impermanence. Each lesson had been hard-earned, born from moments of suffering, introspection, and finally acceptance. But these lessons, he realized, were his greatest gift to himself and to his family. When he passed, he left behind not only memories, but a legacy of wisdom. His children spoke of him not as a man who sought their attention, but as one who radiated peace and understanding. They carried with them the knowledge he had imparted, that true happiness in old age is not dictated by where we live or who surrounds us, but by how we live, and the grace with which we walk our individual paths. His story became a quiet beacon, reminding all who knew him of the enduring power of inner peace and unconditional love. A final reflection. The story of this elderly man serves as a profound reminder of the universal truths we often overlook. In our pursuit of happiness, it is tempting to look outward, believing that fulfillment lies in others, in their attention, their validation, or their presence. Yet, as the Buddha taught, true peace and contentment are not gifts others can bestow upon us. They arise from within our own hearts and minds. This story teaches us the transformative power of letting go. By releasing our attachment to expectations and embracing the impermanence of life, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. We learn that relationships flourish not under the weight of obligation, but in the lightness of unconditional love and understanding. The elderly man's journey reminds us that happiness is not a place or a person. It is a state of being, cultivated by acceptance and gratitude. It also urges us to redefine solitude. Solitude is not a void, but an opportunity, a sacred space to reconnect with ourselves, to reflect on life's beauty, and to find joy in the small, fleeting moments that make each day meaningful. Through solitude, we discover that we are never truly alone, as the peace we seek resides within us, always ready to be uncovered. As you reflect on this story, consider its lessons in your own life. What expectations might you need to release? How can you find joy in the present moment, rather than waiting for it to come from others? These questions, if answered with honesty and openness, have the power to transform not just your relationships, but your entire outlook on life. Let us strive to walk this path of inner peace together. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. How do you practice non-attachment or embrace impermanence in your life? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Join us in exploring the wisdom of the ages and finding peace in today's world. Together, we can build a community rooted in love, understanding, and the shared journey of self-discovery.